It is from my strong belief that before you actually tell people that they should get better at something, you first of all make sure that you have your expectations right. And this is what the product, the PM Wheel, is basically all about. So it was my attempt to create a compass for product leaders and product managers alike to either use it for self-assessment or assessment purposes to figure out, hey, what type of product manager do we want to have in this organization?
Welcome to the Product Weekend podcast, where we dive into conversations that inspire and challenge the way we think about product management, leadership, and innovation. In every episode, we explore how to build high-performing teams, foster psychological safety, and lead with purpose. My name is João Moita, and today we have an awesome guest with us from whom you'll hear more in just a second. Before we jump in, make sure to follow us on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or your preferred podcast platform. And if you enjoy what you hear, leave a review. It only takes a moment and helps us bring even more value to the product community. Let's get started.
Petra, welcome to the Product Weekend podcast. It's so great to have you.
Yeah, likewise. Happy to be here. Hi.
Awesome. So before we dive into your background, we'll talk about strong product people, the PM wheel, and how it all connects to psychological safety and the importance of kind of environments in product teams. I want to start with a bit of a personal question. What's a recent weekend that you really enjoyed?
Oh, we actually had a super lazy weekend the other day, and that's rare because we're a bit of a camping family. We love to hit the road, go to the sea and stuff like that.
Interesting.
Now in winter we take it a bit slower for obvious reasons. Here in Germany it's not so nice go camping in the winter. And then sometimes we really allow us some lazy weekends. And the only thing we did, I think, was
That's
ice
nice.
skating, which I love in winter.
Cool.
And the little one loves it as well. So that was quite cool. But other than that, we took it easy, and it's sometimes so nice to recharge batteries.
That's needed sometimes, for sure. Awesome to hear. For our listeners that don't know much about you, most of them have probably heard about your work, but can you give us just a bit of an overview of your career and what led you to your current up to?
Yeah, so I'm in tech for, I'd say, 25 years now, which sounds like a long time, and it is. I started a career as a developer, was not the quickest one on the planet. And at some point, the colleagues pushed me more in this direction of, hey, you're actually quite good in talking with our clients and our customers. Could you do more of that and just bring the work requirements home? So I followed that trajectory, and that first led me to project management, then to product management in various organizations. I started in a big German publishing house, then made a short 2-year stint at SN, then moved to a back then super small startup in Hamburg, which was a social network, business social network like LinkedIn. Worked for them for a while in product roles, all the way up to senior product roles, and then decided to go for the management path. First became head of product, later managing director of startups. And from there, at some point, I decided maybe I could try if I could help others getting real good in this whole product management thing. We're talking the year 2011, so that was quite some time ago. And yeah, it is...
Before it was cool.
Yeah, to some extent before it was cool. Yeah, I actually had a conversation where people said, like, that won't be a thing. So who will actually hire a product person? Now we call it fractional or interim. Back then it was, none of these words existed, and people were like, that sounds like a weird concept for a self-employment freelancer career. But here in Germany and Europe, I figured parental leaves, for example, are oftentimes long and can be a year long in Germany or even longer. And then obviously company needed somebody who cover for the team. So that's the first stuff that I did. And from there, I became more of a product discovery coach for teams that wanted to learn the ropes of product discovery. And 6-ish years ago, I decided that I solely focus on coaching people in leadership roles, so product leadership folks that run the product organization. There was not much material there. There were not many people available helping them to actually get better at what they do. Oftentimes they stumble into these roles from business backgrounds or marketing backgrounds. And that's what I do for the last few years.
Awesome. And one thing that you've done that has been really impactful, at least from my perspective, is your book, Strong Product People, which I've read recently and really loved it. I think it's a very actionable and comprehensive guide, especially for people starting in leadership positions in product. And one thing you mentioned there is the PM wheel. Can you give us an overview of what's the PM wheel and what is it for?
Yeah, really briefly what the book is all about for the ones that haven't been exposed to it yet. So the book is for people in leadership roles, as I said, running product organizations and that want to up their people development game. So it's not touching on all topics that product leadership is all about. It's really zooming in on this people development part of it. So how do you actually build a team? How do you hire for successful product people? How do you onboard them in an appropriate way? How do you help them grow? And it is from my strong belief that before you actually tell people that they should get better at something, you first of all make sure that you have your expectations right. And this is what the product, the PM wheel, is basically all about. So it was my attempt to create a compass for product leaders and product managers alike to either use it for self-assessment or assessment purposes, to figure out, hey, what type of product manager do we want to have in this organization? That's, by the way, why I always recommend people to customize it. So it helps you to overcome this fear of the blank page where we talk about role definitions and expectations. But you always need to, it's the smallest common denominator, one could say. And some companies need to configure it heavily. Others use it as it is and just say, yeah, we have this one technical PM and we needed to customize it for this particular role or something like that. But I always, first of all, you look at it and then you might just slightly customize it. But then you can really use it in onboarding conversations, even in hiring, and definitely in performance review conversations. You ask the product person to first do a self-assessment. Ideally, they talk to their team as well to get their perspective on some of the aspects. Developers, design folks might have an opinion as well, how their product person is actually doing. And then the leadership person definitely has a take on it as well. And ideally, the thing helps you get a clearer picture of where a product person could grow more. You could have tactical conversations about, hey, I think you're perfect for the role that you're currently having. But the next bigger challenge that I see for you is over here. So maybe we already want to start developing a particular skill with you or something like that. So ideally, it helps to make career conversations a bit easier, less personal, more focused. So that's what the product management wheel is all about, which is, by the way, available for free on my website. So you don't have to buy the book to make use of the PM wheel.
Awesome. Yeah, that's really powerful in my experience, also having these clear expectations on necessary for you also to get to the next level, understand what are the areas where you're lacking or where you're excelling, and making sure that you leverage your strength and also improve the things that you're lacking. It's super powerful. Yeah. And I think it's creating that shared understanding. It has a very, it's very powerful for creating a psychologically safe environment, right? If you don't have this common denominator, like things are just assumed, expectations are just assumed, and people can easily feel not safe to be themselves and to do the best work.
Yeah, it's hard to operate in the vacuum role description wise, right? And I see many companies that have no role descriptions. Some have role definitions because HR needs them to create the job ads. So that's oftentimes the reason why they have them. But they're not helpful for the actual product person doing the work. And this is why I created this product management wheel. At least it should help people to get the conversation going.
Exactly. Yeah, that's a... I felt it has a very strong problem. And from our experience in Product Weekend events, we also see it's very common for people to be confused about what should be my role, where am I lacking, not even understanding what's expected of them. And a tool like this or a framework like this can be very powerful. How would you recommend for a leader or maybe a PM even in an organization where there's no clear expectation, no clear framework for career development and for areas of focus? How can they implement the PM wheel and start using it?
Yeah, glad that you said like the PM, because that's oftentimes how I see the product management wheel entering organizations, because PM has this urge to figure out, what should I actually get better at? Or I don't have a really precise understanding of my role is all about. So then they go look and search the internet for exactly these things. There are more tools out there than mine. I have a blog post on my blog talking about career frameworks for PMs in general. So Ravi Mehta, for example, has one. Marty definitely has a take on it.
Exactly.
So there are several ones. I usually advise people to look at them and use the one that is closest to what they currently do, and then take it from there. And then I always encourage people to just use it. So you start with a self-assessment, or in the worst case scenario is they look at the PM wheel and then they think, oh, shit, this is actually done by 4 people in my organization, because we have a business owner, a product owner, a product manager, and a business analyst. And all of them are doing parts of what Petra is talking about here.
Yeah.
And that definitely is a super big challenge in many organizations. And the setup is not an ideal setup, at least from my perspective, but still many companies are running these setups. Then it's a role split conversation, and then product management folks cannot do this on their own. So then it's a managing up thing. Then they have to talk to the manager and say, hey, look, it's super hard to draw the line between our 4 roles that we're having. This is the things that Petra says like needs to happen for successful product management. So maybe we can split the wheel on our 4 roles that we're having. And already that is a helpful conversation. So you could use it like that. And ideally, it's just like you use it as a self-assessment. You figure out, oh, interesting, Petra talks a lot about team and team motivation. And am I responsible for motivating the team? And then that could give you a reason to have a one-on-one conversation with your leadership person. So yeah, there are many ways how you could use it. I think as soon as you download it and try to use it as a self-assessment, you'll figure, is it more that we have a general systemic problem that we need to tackle in this organization, that we're not sure about where the roles end and where the other roles responsibility starts? Or is it more, okay, no, we have the roles pretty clear. I just want to use this to help me find leadership learning headlines. I call it learning headlines. Yeah. Because you use it and then you figure, okay, in one area, I have no clue about what Petra is talking about. And if you think it could be beneficial for you, then, for example, that could be your learning headline for the next 4 months. Let's say it's prioritization. And then you could start looking at the world through that lens, right? Because you and I know there is no shortage of content. So there's so many books and blog posts and podcasts and stuff like that. But if you have a learning headline, it gets easier to decide what to listen to and what to look at and stuff like that. And then you can accommodate that in your daily work life. Yeah. So that's how I would recommend people using it.
Cool. Can you expand a little bit on that? So if I understand correctly, what you would call a learning headline would be something that I define for myself, and for a certain period of time, that's my main area of focus of what I need to learn. Is that how you think about it?
Yeah, exactly. So you can keep it rather, there's a second part of my assessment, which I call the future self. Because once you found your learning headline, for example, you suck at prioritization, it's not your strong skill. The future self describe how it currently feels, how it currently is, how people currently think about you having that skill or not having that skill. Then you talk about how things would change once you build that skill, once you gained more knowledge about this particular thing. And then you talk about action items. So what gets you closer to this ideal scenario? It's super simple. It's just like these 3 things and a bit of a timeline. And it's part of the PM Wheel PDF if people want to look for it. And that is basically the thing that you want to do after the assessment. So it's really, okay, prioritization-wise, people constantly complain in my organization that my prioritization is all over the place. Stakeholders just recently started to complain behind my back that I'm not a good product manager and then the as-is description would be more, okay, ideally in an ideal scenario, I have lesser discussions about prioritization. I can talk about why the prioritization is as it is. For example, why are the backlog items in my backlog in this particular order? I can talk about it in a way that 3, stakeholders can follow my rationale. They most likely won't like your rationale because oftentimes then that's not their feature that is going to build next. But at least they can understand why the priorities are like the priorities are, right? And then you would need to understand, okay, what gets me closer to this ideal? For example, have I ever reflected on how I am prioritizing? So maybe that's my first step. I write down what my current prioritization framework is. And then I figure, there are more prioritization frameworks. So we want to read a bit about prioritization frameworks and see if there's one that works better. And then we want to see if storytelling helps a bit so that we can explain in better ways why we have the priorities that we have. And once that is done, we do tests, as always in product. We run an experiment. So we talk to several stakeholders and see if our arguments are landing. If not, we refine, right? So that would be what I would recommend people doing if they have their learning headline. Yeah.
Okay, cool. And how do you do that? Is that something that you do more on an individual level, or it's the role of the leader to make sure that the people in the team have this clarified? How do you think about that?
Yeah, I know from surveys that, I don't know what the exact number was, but I think 80% of all people all product people, IC level, are not optimally supported when it comes to their personal development. So in a survey that I took ages ago, that I created ages ago, 80% of the people said, or it was 78 or something like that, but we're really close to 80, said like their boss is not caring about their personal development at all. So that's the reality that we're facing out there. That's why I wrote the book, by the way, because I think this should change. I find it super weird, given that leaders are not trying to improve everybody's performance to some extent, and not by saying work faster, but by helping the people to get more skills and more knowledgeable in the work they do. So that's why I wrote the book. It was my kind of say to say, hey, this is one part of product leadership. It's an important part of product leadership. I get it. It's hard. So here's a lot of things that you could do to make it easier. And for example, in the book, I talk about things like product strategy, but from a coaching perspective. So if you as a leader think like this product person does not yet have product strategy skills, how can you help them build them? Or if you see that this particular individual contributor is not good in balancing discovery and delivery, they always focus on one or the other too much, then I have a chapter on how you could help them balance these two forces. So everything in the book is really through this lens of coaching, so to say, and trying to help product leaders to understand coaching is a thing and how they can do it, how they can basically bake it into their daily life and daily schedules.
Why do you think this happens? Because again, maybe the number is not exact, but
80-ish%.
Majority of people don't feel supported in their roles. But if you ask anyone that is a leader, that is about to become a leader, they would say that they know in theory that they need to support their people and develop their people, right? Why in practice they don't do it? What's stopping?
Yeah, we can. So the question is, it depends. If you ask the leader, they say yes for various reasons. And if you ask their direct reports, if they're doing it, they say they're not doing it for different reasons. So there is no easy answer. But oftentimes the definition of good coaching is different. So the leader thinks like, I run one-on-ones, and people could, if they would, ask me how I think about their career, but nobody does, but they could. So this active people development part is not happening. So it's a bit of a tricky question. But for most leaders that I have in coaching, so some are just not aware of the fact that it should be part of the job. That's easy to fix. I make them aware of the fact that it is part of their job. And then for some, as said, it's not easy to see how they could take first simple steps towards that. And the first simple step is always start with your one-on-ones. Many leaders don't do one-on-ones. Not at all. Not happening. They never talk to their people other than the occasional walk around and meeting them at the water cooler if company is on site. And if it's a remote hybrid setup, it's maybe the occasional check-in Slack message. How's everybody doing to the entire product organization? And how is everybody doing as a Slack message is not checking in on your people. It's not coaching them towards excellence. So oftentimes it's more this practicalities wise. How is it actually possible to do? And then oftentimes leaders are not comfortable with these conversations either. So they actually don't know how to have personal conversations with their direct reports. Because people could talk about feelings, and not sure if I want that in my business context. So that's another thing. That's a personal development for product leaders, definitely a topic as well. Yeah. So there are various reasons.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, like what you mentioned. Sometimes they know they should, but they don't know where to start, and they may feel overwhelmed. And that's actually what I think that your book is really powerful, because it gives like actionable things that look. We can start doing this.
Here's
Monday.
One question.
Yeah.
Just a quick break. If you're enjoying the episode, don't forget to hit follow and leave a rating. Your support keeps us going and helps us share even more insights with listeners like you. Now, let's get back to the conversation.
Then psychological safe environments are usually diverse and inclusive. So there are always these employees that don't like to speak up at a meeting, for example. And and it could be super simple, right? But in a psychological safe environment, the leader would make sure that this voice is equally heard. And that can be either by picking different formats for the meetings, where everybody writes post-its and you don't have to present them or something like that, or by actively asking the quiet person after the meeting, or whatever it is. But the leader should care that all voices are equally heard and that everybody has an appropriate channel to speak up, for example. So that is definitely something that leaders could actually be doing. And another thing that helps is, we try to practice that in coaching sometimes with my coaches, is the leader needs to be vulnerable or show vulnerability too. Because if I'm not able to admit my mistakes, and it can be super small things. So stakeholder communication was not ideal for our last release because I was too busy with something else, and something else was on my mind. Maybe I get divorced in my personal life, and that's why my head was somewhere else. But I think sharing this with the team, asking for help, even in leadership position, that really helps to create a more psychological safe environment. Yeah. And then there are obviously some basics. So we don't want to discrimination is something that we don't want to have in a psychological safe environment, because if everybody is always heads down because of maybe they will be discriminated for whatever, race, gender, speaking up about a certain topic, whatever it is, that's definitely not a psychological safe environment. So yeah, that will be the challenge of the next few years.
I would say the hard part about psychological safety is that there's not necessarily a clear recipe.
Yeah.
You always need a balance, and if you go too much in one direction, you can damage it in other ways. For example, the example you were mentioning of sharing about my mistakes and of my personal life. Like, that's great as a leader to create that space and also to give the context to people on what's happening and to encourage that they do the same. But you also don't want to overshare and bring all your personal problems to work and worry people with your personal problems. Yeah. And also you don't want to share too many mistakes in the sense that people start doubting your competency at the same. So it's always this balance that you need to do, and it's not super easy to explain or to give.
Yeah, and for some people that comes naturally. So funnily enough, most product people don't struggle with understanding what psychological safety is all about in creating it, because you end up in a product role because you can convince people to be a team to solve a particular problem together, right? To some extent, this lateral leadership thing is something that product people to some extent are good at. And even if it's a different beast if you need to create psychological safety from a systemic end, when you're in a leadership role, that's a different thing. But most product people, for their little team, for all the engineers they love, it's not so hard for all of us to create this psychological safety. And sometimes you just need these reminders of, is every voice equally heard in my team? Or maybe is there one person that always just sits there nodding along and really we don't hear their voice or opinion? Maybe I can change that. You might need some checks and balances to make sure that you really have everything on your radar. But most of the product people don't struggle to create an environment where people feel safe and welcomed and heard. So it's to some extent, otherwise you don't end up in the role of rare. It is really rare that people end up in the role that can't do this. Yeah.
It's that super important skill of product people, which is common sense. So
yeah, exactly. You're so right.
The very important thing there is when do this. It's to have this. To be open to this topic and not override it because it's just a fluffy thing. Like, it's really important that people think about it, and maybe it's not necessary to have a full program of interventions and new things that you do, but just paying attention to these things. Like, most people, if you ask, they wouldn't say that there's they would most PMs would say that they hear everyone's voices. But if you actually think about it and you start things that you have, maybe if you have this thing in your mind, maybe you'll notice, oh, I never heard that say anything. Exactly. And I didn't notice until I prompted to check
and
for
a
the...
really strong thing to do is reward when people show the intended behavior. For example, that's always the leadership hack, right? So if
Exactly.
somebody has the guts and is brave enough to speak up out about something, that's why whistleblowing is always a thing, right? We want to reward that because as an organization, we want to hear early on from failures, or we want to hear early where people see friction between people or between roles or conflicting goals. Conflicting goals is we have this conversation about, hey, and then I have these two departments, they're always in conflict all the time. And if we unpack it, we so often find it's because leadership gave them conflicting goals. It's not the people. Marketing gets tasked to do this, while sales gets tasked to do that, while product gets tasked to do this. And now we wonder why there's conflicts between these departments, right? But in psychological safe environments, people would say sales and marketing and product would figure, okay, somehow we always head to head. We need to escalate that. Joint escalation, that would be happening in safe, psychological safe environments, right? The salesperson and the product person together would go to their boss and say, the fuck? We have problems here. Can you help us fix it, right? In not so psychological safe environments, people would stay in their silo. People would not speak up. People would go home, maybe burn out even because of loyal to the company, but super stressful at work and not sure what to do about it. Closed doors, they have no exposure to the leadership person or no good personal connection to them. And that costs a company a lot of money. So that's why open door policy became a thing at some point, and this is why we started to talk about psychological safety in the first place.
Yeah, that's a really good point. And what are some resources or direction that you suggest people to turn into if they want to dive deep and improve in these areas? So
so I think the quickest intro to see if it's a topic for you that resonates is really Amy Edmondson's TED Talk on the topic. So that's the first go-to resource. Then she wrote a book which is called Fearless Organization or Organizations. I'm not sure about I think singular.
The Fearless Organization,
I think that's an amazing book if you want to dive deeper in it, and we can link that in the show notes. There's a Harvard Business Review about high-performing teams and how to create psychological safety, which is quite nice. And there is a massive blog post on a blog that the company is called Psych Safety. For a reason, so that's what they do for living. They do coaching and consulting around psychological safety, and I have obviously some basic definition blog posts on their website that are really helpful. I can make sure that I send this to you. And then there is a bit of a special interest blog post, but I still would like to mention it. Jeff Gotthelf wrote about why psychological safety is super important for learning in agile teams. Because there is this kind of, okay, we want to iterate, we want to do stuff, then we want to iterate on stuff, and then we want to improve our ways of working all the time. And he says like this entire cycle is not happening if there is no psychological safety. This underlining theme in all agile teams only works if a certain level of psychological safety is given. And he's so right with that. So yeah, we make sure that we link all of those in the show notes, I'd say.
Awesome. Thank you for sharing. Yeah, I think the organization you're mentioning is one that's founded by Tom Garathi, and he was also a speaker here on the podcast. So we also have that episode where we dive into some of these topics. And also another one, Gina, the previous episode, she also has an organization focused on this. Yeah, if you're listening this episode and it's your first one landing in the product, in the psychological safety topic, there are some other episodes back that you can check out. I think we need to create a page with all these links.
Yeah, maybe it's a good idea.
We can have the resources available. Awesome. Thank you for sharing. Yeah, so we're going towards the end of our conversation. Also wanted to ask what advice would you have for PMs that want to become product leaders? What should they start doing today to go in that direction?
Feedback skills.
To be strong product leaders.
So my first,
feedback skills,
yeah, exactly. Nice. So I think the easiest skill to practice that prepares you for leadership and management is being able to give various feedback types in various situations to various types of people. That's definitely something that you need in a leadership role. So can you give situational feedback to somebody about how a meeting went, for example, or can you give feedback about the behavior that a person shows that is maybe having a negative impact on team motivation or something like that? And that's definitely something that every product manager can already practice with their current team. And I always recommend people. So there is a book written by Carol Robbins and a colleague of hers, which name I don't recall. And the book is called Connect. And that's an amazing book on the topic. And then in my book, I talk a bit about the situation, behavior, impact, structure, forgiving framework. So that's definitely amazing. And Julie Su, she's written an amazing book, Becoming a Manager. And she talks about a lot about feedback as well. So that's the one skill that you can already practice even before you step into the leadership role. So I think that's an important and easy skill to build. And the other one is storytelling and public speaking. And with public speaking, I don't necessarily mean outside of the organization, but you should be comfortable in getting in front of people in your organization to explain your current roadmap or to you explain to your current strategy. And that's where the storytelling comes into play. It's really how to be inspiring in these situations. So I think those skills can easily be practiced while you're still in your individual contributor role. They help you as individual contributor career as well, but they prepare you well for when you want to make the jump.
Love that. Feedback and storytelling. 100% agree. Awesome. Petra, finally, just one small thing. Who is someone that you look up to and that you have as a reference in this field of product in general, but maybe a bit more specifically in creating these high-performing teams?
Oh, that's a good question. So a person that I have many conversations about on this topic is Kate Leto. She, I don't know, was she guest already as well?
She was also
okay, that's amazing. So there's another episode that we could dig out.
Yeah.
And Kate is talking a lot about emotional, EQ, not IQ. That's what she talks a lot about. So shout out to Kate because we had a lot of conversations about that over a glass of red wine in Copenhagen where we had shared clients. So she has some nice material and takes on this EQ topic and being more emotional, mature in this whole business environment. So that's maybe one shout out.
Awesome. Thank you for that. And yeah, if people listening want to know more what Kate has to say on the topic, we had a very interesting conversation where we dived into the connection between emotional intelligence and psychological safety.
See? Cool. Amazing.
Yeah. Awesome. Cool. And last but not least, how can people find you, reach out, learn more from you? What's the best way to do that?
I think, so if you're in a product leadership role, I think my newsletter is an amazing resource for the people. It just comes quarterly, so it hits your inbox with every new season, so to say, and a follow on LinkedIn is helpful. And for the people who want to meet in person, I'm running a conference in Hamburg in June. You will see me on stage there for sure. So that's another opportunity to meet.
Yeah. Awesome. I can say it's an amazing conference.
You've been with us last year. Exactly. It was so much fun.
Yeah, it was. I think I won't be able to make it this year, but
bummer.
I highly recommend it. Anyone that wants to learn more and connect with a lot of very curious product people, I think it's a great place.
Thank you. So that's another link for the show notes. Sorry.
Yeah, we'll have long show notes, I see.
Love it.
Cool.
Cool.
Petra, thank you so much.
Pleasure.
It was awesome chatting. And yeah, thank you so much for being here.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks for tuning in to the Product Weekend podcast. We hope today's episode sparked some new ideas and inspired you on your journey. If you found it valuable, be sure to follow us and share the podcast with others who might benefit. We'd love to hear your thoughts. Connect with us on LinkedIn or send us an email at team@theproductweekend.com. Until next time, keep learning, leading, and making an impact. See you in the next episode.